Down. They've
Should
had
I just start talking?
a little too much coffee, but go ahead and begin whenever you're ready.
All right. Well, if I start talking, maybe people will be quiet, right? All right. Good morning, Mayor and Council. Brad Clark with Community Development. So this topic is a follow-up to one that we've had a few times over the last several months. That being minimum density in the potential development code text amendment. A couple of background slides here just to kind of summarize how we got to where we are today. The Housing Advisory Committee started discussing the concept of adding a minimum density in 2019, and then they added a specific work plan action item in fall of 2019. And then at your strategic planning workshop in January of 2020, the City Council, I put acknowledges in sort of air quotes there, mainly because there has never been a formal action by the City Council to adopt the Housing Advisory Committee's work plan, but there have been a few discussions about it and sort of acknowledging that the content is something that the Council wants to see us move forward on. So that was done in January 2020 when that concept was presented at the strategic plan retreat. Then in October of 2020, Housing Advisory Committee included minimum density zoning in its list of top 10 priorities. And then in March of 21, they passed a motion to recommend to the Council minimum density standards. Council picked that up in May of this year, where there was a workshop where we had this topic on. There was a number of questions that were raised there, and so the Council continued that workshop until August. And then at the August 30th workshop, which is the last time the Council has talked about this, your direction was to bring forward an actual draft code amendment. So that's where we are today. So the general purpose and goals of a minimum density ordinance, and this is generally true, across all jurisdictions. It can vary a little bit, but generally it's to help accomplish the housing goals of the Grants Pass Comp Plan. And there are two specific policies that are in the adopted comp plan, 9.4 and 9.8, where a minimum density ordinance could be viewed as helping to further those goals. Also, in those areas that have high levels of public service and infrastructure, that service capacity, basically, you could view a minimum density ordinance as helping to move those areas to its fullest extent. So, for example, if we have planned, for a larger stormwater or larger sewer or larger water pipe sizes in a particular area, and those are in the master plan to serve a high density area, the capacity is being either planned for that area or is already in the ground, that you have a wider pipe. And so then to come through and come in with densities that are well below what that pipe size was planned for or what that stormwater facility was planned for could be used. You could see minimum density as actually furthering the extent and the goal of that particular area. Also achieving more efficient use of available residential lands. That those bullet number 2 and 3 are kind of related in that sense. And then helping to increase the diversity of housing types. Minimum density codes for those cities that have had them across the country have been viewed as fostering some of the middle housing or the higher density housing types. So this is just a quick recap of a couple of applicable findings that are in our housing needs analysis. This is a draft document that the Council has seen now a couple of times. There's a public hearing in January at the Planning Commission to review and adopt or recommend to the Council adoption of the housing needs analysis. These were sort of pointed out at the August 30 meeting as being relevant to minimum density. We do have a forecast to grow at about a little over 1% per year over the next 2 decades, adding about 9,400 residents. The population growth will require about 4,055 new traditional dwelling units over the next 20 years. And then about 60% of the future housing needs are forecasted to be broken down into those percentages that are there in that last bullet. And 18% are anticipated to be, either townhomes or plexes, such as like 3-plexes, 4-plexes. 13% apartments, 6% manufactured housing, and 3% in-group quarters. So those percentages were arrived at by 3J and FCS Group. Those are the two consultants that we had helping with the housing needs analysis. And in looking at the land supply that we currently have within the city and within the urban growth boundary, how are we going to achieve that 4,055 number with the land that we have? And so those were sort of the percentages that are in there. And minimum density could be viewed as helping to achieve those targets. So the current standards that are in the code for maximum density are shown here. And the code, or I'm sorry, the zoning districts that we're talking about and that the council gave us direction on at your last workshop are the R3-2s and the R3s and R4s. So those are here in the bottom 2 rows. So these are what are currently in the code. Those are not proposed to change. So it's a maximum density of 17.4 dwelling units per acre in the R3-1 and 20 dwelling units per acre in the R3-2, and then 34.8 in the R4 zones. Yes?
So, can you explain what the thinking is or was like on the low density? It seems like those gradations between the types are so small. There's such a small difference between, 3.96, 4.84. So what was the thinking behind having such small differences in different zoning designations, and why would that be?
Yeah, I'm just going to guess a little bit here because I wasn't here when the zoning districts were created for Grants Pass. But traditionally, they're going to look at more at the lot size than they are the actual density. So I think the density figure is really just an outgrowth of what that average lot size is. So you have, the average or the minimum lot size being 11,000 square feet in those in that R112, and then the R110, going to like the 8,000 square foot minimum lot size, and then so usually it's looking at what is that average across the city, and then and if you look at a difference of only 1,500 or 2,000 square foot minimum lot size, it doesn't really extrapolate out much to density. It's very close. You have to really get small lot sizes to get that density to bump up.
So it's coming from the driver is anyway. It's a little reversed than what I thought it would be, but I understand it now. So different depending on the subdivision, depending on when it was put in, depending on the part of the city, is going to basically determine what the minimum lot size was at any given time, I guess.
Right. I mean, I think the city's, the actual zoning district name has probably changed a little bit over the years. They maybe call them something different, but.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm going to follow up on that question while I have it. So you're telling me that, because I did read in the information that came out to us, and I guess you're going to go into that when you talk about the striking and down the road. But what you're saying is that here it's put down for dwellings per acre, correct? Is what the formula figures out. But basically that, from a builder's point of view, comes to lot size. And so lot size is really what we're talking about here. And so when you go to R18, I'm going to assume that goes down to what, is it 7,000, or what is the lot size right now currently for low density and moderate density?
So each of those zones has a little different, and I'm gonna I don't want to give you the exact number, and I thought I brought it up here with me. I'll have to pull
Okay.
that and get it to you, but
right.
it ranges from about 11,000 square foot lot sizes to 5,000 square foot lot sizes. That's the range that we have in there between those low and moderate density
Okay.
zones.
Thank you.
Okay? So the minimum density, when we talk about minimum density at 60%, we're talking about 60% of these numbers in this far right column, which is the maximum density. So that maximum density, as we were just discussing, is kind of arrived at by looking at those lot sizes, and then if you calculate out what's the number of units that you can get at those particular lot sizes, that's the maximum. And what we're saying with this minimum density ordinance is we're saying you actually are required to reach 60% of that maximum. And in this case, we're talking about 4 different zones. Those are highlighted in yellow: R31, R32, and R41, R42. So that's the direction that we got at your last workshop. So in those 4 zoning districts, the minimum density at 60% would be this 10.46 and 12, and then 20.88 units per acre. So those are the minimums, with the exceptions that we'll talk about here in a little bit. So the code amendment itself, and we do have on your dais a copy of the actual draft code amendment, and so everything in red in that document is what's proposed to change. And I'll just highlight kind of a few of the main pieces in there. So amendment would change one existing section in Article 12 and would create one new section. That's just telling you which sections of the code are going to change. Secondly, the staff proposes to delete the current what's called an M suffix, which is the minimum density suffix that allows the minimum density standard to be used with any zone. So if I'll just go back up here, and this screenshot here is taken from the development code, from the city's development code, and you can see we already have this M that is listed here in the R3 and the R4 and the R5. Those are created in the code today, but there's no property, no land on the ground that actually has that M designation. It's been in the code for many, many years, but it's never actually been implemented. But the code today does allow for it to be implemented, meaning a developer could come through and say, hey, I want to rezone my property to this M suffix, or the city could go, yeah, we want to rezone this property using this M suffix. What we're saying in this second bullet is that would probably create some confusion now, and the proposal would just be to take that out and just focus only on the R3 and the R4 zones. And again, as with any code amendment, this is all subject to, to discussion and council direction. So here's what that looks like in this particular Schedule 12-4B. By striking out the M designation here on the R3 and the R4, and then changing the minimum density in the R3 to R31 to 10.46 dwelling units per acre, and the R32 to 12 dwelling units per acre, and then the R41 and R42 to 20.88. Continuing on in terms of what other code amendment would affect, what this code amendment would affect, new residential development in the R3, well, I'm sorry, that should be R31, R32, R4, and R42 zoning district is required to achieve at least 60%. So it just states flat out what's being required. And then a site that's non-conforming in the minimum density, which of course we would have many because there's lots of land in the city right now that has those zones that is built on that doesn't achieve that minimum density. So for those properties, they just couldn't go further out of conformance with the minimum density standard. So any new development, any new subdivision that might happen on those parcels, they would have to demonstrate that they would meet the 60%. Units may be added which bring the site closer to conformance without coming all the way into conformance as part of a phase project. So those two are related in that if you have a larger property, you know, this isn't saying you have to build it all out right now. What it's saying is you prepare a plan that demonstrates how you're dividing your property will allow you to meet that 60%. But it's, so if you're just going to bring in, you know, some units that get you closer to that minimum density, that, you know, that would be acceptable. Moving on, land divisions in the R3 and R4 zones are required to demonstrate compliance with the minimum density requirements of the base zone at the time of the land division application. So each of those zoning districts has, you know, a number of other requirements that are there, such as landscaping and parking and setbacks and those kinds of code requirements. So, so this is saying that if you do a land division, you're required to demonstrate compliance with that, with all of those elements. So you would show, for example, a footprint of a new triplex, or a new fourplex, or a new eightplex, whatever, in order, and show that you can still meet the minimum standards of that zone. And again, we're not saying that you come in with a building permit right away, but you do need to show on your plan that you could comply with the new 60%. Now, it says unless modified through a plan unit development, because that's a mechanism that the city has that allows, you know, for some changes to those minimum standards. So you can shrink your setbacks, you can do some, you know, some other changes to your site plan through a plan unit development that you can't do through a subdivision. Section 12.145, so this adds flood hazard areas as one of the natural features that would be deducted in the land area before calculating minimum density. So this is a section that already is in the code, and it says, okay, if you're going to do minimum density, you get to a net. It's not based on gross, meaning if you have a 1 acre piece of ground and you have a wetland in one corner, or you have some steep slope in another section, you take those out, and then you calculate your minimum density on what's left. Right now, this section of code, 12.145, doesn't actually list flood hazard areas as one of those areas that you can subtract out. So that's, I think, was an oversight that's very common to see. If you have a 100-year floodplain area, generally that's removed when you're talking about minimum densities. So another topic that Council asked for us to look at more was, you know, how do you deal with land that gets exempted or has an exception so that you don't have to comply with the 60% rule. So we looked at a number of other cities. We looked at Sherwood, we looked at Tigard, we looked at Ashland, I think 3 or 4 others, and tried to find what some other jurisdictions are doing and look at what we already have in our code for exceptions in some other types of development. And this is what's being proposed. So the first one is an exemption, just flat out exempt. So we wouldn't have to come in with any kind of request. So if you have a site that's 10,000 square feet or less, I'm sorry, that's less than 10,000, so 9,999, then you're not going to be subject to the 60% rule, regardless. The exceptions allows for the special requests that would be submitted through a letter, and right now it's drafted to say that if you have a development on a building site that is 10,000 square feet or larger, if the applicant can demonstrate by means of a detailed site plan that the site is so constrained that the proportional share of the required minimum density cannot be provided and still meet the development standards in the underlying zone. An exception may be granted. Right now, that exception is shown to be at the director level. That's common in the other jurisdictions that we looked at. Obviously, that's up to council on how you want to do that. I wouldn't recommend that it go outside because you could see several requests. It would be kind of a more technical kind of review of it, just a checklist if they do or don't. They would have to show how that constraint is there. And that could be because one example that is common would be if you have a single family house that's sitting in a parcel in such a way, it's not to a corner, but it may be right in the middle, and it's just very difficult to get accesses for fire, to get access for other emergency vehicles, or to meet the setback from that single family house to whatever new development is happening. Some of those kinds of issues could certainly come up. So this is written fairly broadly on purpose, just because it's impossible to anticipate what every situation would be. That's kind of some of the background to that exception. And again, that would be through basically a letter to community development. This is just kind of showing this. We have this currently in our code, just in multiplexes, showing just a sample of street trees along the one frontage, and then in the parking area there's some required landscaping in the parking area. There's common open space that's required, screen trash enclosure, and the point of this diagram is just to show what we would probably expect to see if a developer or a property owner wanted an exception. They would go through this kind of high level. They wouldn't have to get an engineer. They wouldn't have to hire an architect. They could probably mostly handle this on their own, sketch this out and say, okay, well, because of the existing site conditions, here's what you require for landscaping, parking, et cetera. We're unable to meet it for this reason. So that just shown as an example. Last slide here. For proposed minimum density code amendment, there's three other key pieces. One, the applicant could demonstrate or must demonstrate that the maximum number of residential units are being provided while complying with all applicable development standards. Secondly, nothing in the amendment precludes an applicant from applying for a variance to development standards. That's added in there just kind of as a clarifier if somebody wants to say, okay, I actually do want to help to achieve the 60%, but I'm going to need a 23-foot wide access instead of a 24-foot wide access, or I'm going to ask for 2 feet off my landscaping instead of 5 feet off, something like that. It's saying that the variance could be applied for. That's not saying that you could use the variance to request getting out of the 60%. And then finally, if a property is occupied by a single dwelling, as of the date of this ordinance, the dwelling can be enlarged, reconstructed, or replaced in the event of a natural hazard. So just kind of a typical non-conforming use clause that we see a lot in these codes, just to kind of reiterate, especially for underwriters, or others in the insurance industry who often call our office and say, hey, we're doing an assessment, an analysis on this property. Can this be rebuilt? That's a common question in appraisals, and so this code would give that assurance. So that's the crux of what we're talking about in terms of the code amendment. It's up to you. There is a Planning Commission public hearing anticipated in early February if you choose to give direction to proceed. And just a reminder, you have in the past, even if you've had a few changes, we have added council changes to the packet for the Planning Commission and asked them to consider what you want the commission to look at in their public hearing. So we could do that. We could bring back more research for you. Or, of course, do not proceed with the minimum density. That's always an option.
Thank you, Brad. Council, what questions do you have? Any questions? Brian?
Yeah, thanks, Brad. I got a few questions. On slide 10, the third bullet point, I didn't totally understand, so I was wondering if maybe you could explain that one more time.
Do I have the right one up on the screen?
Yep.
So the third one, units may be added which bring the site closer to conformance without coming all the way into conformance as part of a phased project. Yeah. So let me see if I can say that a different way. So if there's an existing, when we say could be added, which bring the site closer, that's assuming that somebody would be developing a property that already has some type of development on it. This is saying that you could still come in with a building permit on that property by adding, say, a duplex. Even though that duplex by itself may not get you to the minimum 60%, but if you are phasing your project and you show us a phased development plan that says, okay, well, hey, in this corner, we actually could get a fourplex, and that fourplex would bring that whole site up to 60%. This is saying that you could come in with just the duplex and not have to come in with the duplex and the fourplex in order to reach the 60%.
I see. That makes it clearer. Thank you. And then I was just wondering, what's the difference between an exception and a variance? Because I've heard both of those terms and I don't know what the difference is.
Yeah. So the difference is there is no fee for an exception. It's done strictly at staff level. And it's usually, a 1 to 2 week process. The variance, there's a formal application. You have to pay a fee and you can only get it approved by the Planning Commission. So that is usually a minimum 4 to 6 week process. So it's longer, it's more expensive, and the exception can only be granted by things that are built into the code. A variance, you do have required findings that are in the code, but you could try to make an argument for a variance that's not necessarily explicit in the code. So does that help?
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you. And then I also noticed that we do have a R5 zoning on our books, but do we not have any land that's actually zoned R5?
That's correct.
Okay. And then I also noticed we don't have a housing advisory member here today. I assume that they were invited and just couldn't make it, or?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I didn't touch base with Doug this morning to see what the situation was.
Okay, thanks.
Yep.
Other questions? Val?
Okay, you mentioned that when someone who has land in the future R3 and R4, they will need to come to you with a sketch up front about what they're planning and how they're planning to put the approximately 60% density, correct? So that would be at a pre-conference, is that correct?
Yeah, I think we would do that through a pre-application conference typically. We work with developers on informal sort of reviews if they're really just very high level and they're just looking for an initial read. But if they're to the point, they're pretty serious, they actually have, an offer on a piece of land, or they already own it and they're pretty close, then a pre-application conference is required. So we work with folks if they just want to say, hey, I'm just thinking about this, we can do that without the pre-application. But
Okay, I was curious about that. And then I also had a question on if you own a piece of land that is right now designated on that, and so you're being required to make sure that you have more units on that. Does that affect the financing of that property? I don't know how all this works. So that means that the people would definitely have to make sure they had the funding in place and they were able to be financed for the greater number of units. Is that correct?
It's a good question. We, at staff level wouldn't typically get involved with that side on the financing. I mean, it's not like we're requiring them to demonstrate to us that they're going to be able to fund a project. That's really up to them. So, again, we're not talking about affordable here. We're just talking about market rate development.
Yeah, and I know that, but I also realize that financing is the key that either gets them built or does not get them built. And so I think as we move forward, I'm just making a request, no different than the CETs, that we also have people who are involved in financing and bring somebody from a bank who does this sort of thing to educate us as well. Because that's the piece that I really see is missing, is because it's easy for us to say and look at a piece of paper and say, oh yeah, this is what they need to do. But if it can't be financed, it can't happen. So I think that's a piece of the equation that I'd really like to see brought forth as we move forward. And I am happy to know that this is also going to the Urban Area Planning Commission, unlike the CET tax did. So people will have two options to comment and get a public input on the process as we move forward.
Sure, you bet. I might just point out, we do have a staff person on with People's Bank who is on the Housing Advisory Committee. And he's been on there, I think, since 2017 when it was formed, and he's been pretty involved with these discussions. Haven't heard him raise on this minimum density a specific concern, but I will definitely ask that specific question of him.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Vanessa?
Thank you, Brad. On slide 12, under exceptions, was there any consideration then, rather just an all-out exception, approaching that with a tiered response, that if, let's say, the property has restraints to where 60% can't be met, that's when 55 is visited, and then 50% and 45 and down until they can meet some sort of density?
Yeah, we did kick that around a little bit at staff, and I think that it could work. It probably is going to be just built in, almost baked into the conversation. The assumption is that you're going to strive to meet the 60%, and if you can, it's not like there's 100%. You just go down to as low as you can. And again, I guess it was just that flexibility and that latitude. If you actually write it in the code that says, okay, well, at 55%, then what? Then or 50% or 40%. We struggled a little bit to find, okay, well, what's the criteria at which you go to those thresholds? And it started to get kind of complex. So we've taken the assumption that simple is better when it comes to the code writing. So that's kind of where we landed on that.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Brian?
Yeah, thank you. So I went back and I listened to the March Housing Advisory meeting, and they made the motion to bring forward the 60% for the R3 and the R4 zones, but they had also made a comment just after they made the motion about wanting to look at minimum density in the R2 zone, and it was explained that would be brought back to a subsequent Housing Advisory Committee meeting, and then Housing Advisory didn't meet in April, and then they didn't meet again in May, and then so they had 3 months between their meetings, and so I don't remember if Housing Advisory ever had a discussion about R2 as they had requested, and I don't know if you recall if that had happened or not.
I don't have the dates here. I do believe that the Housing Advisory Committee did talk about the R2 as an option, yes. Jason Mackey did present that at an HAC meeting. And I would have to give you the council, I would have to come back with you with what exactly their comments were, but I know that it wasn't a recommendation to proceed with the R2.
Okay. I remember in that March meeting, there was a very brief discussion about the R2, but I think that the committee wanted more information to have a more robust discussion about it. And so I didn't have enough time to review all of the meetings to see if that actually happened. I've been to all of the meetings, and I don't recall that specific discussion took place after that meeting. But I know that they expressed an interest in getting more information to see if it would be worth having a minimum density at R2. So I guess if
Okay.
you can, look back and see if anything came of that or if that still needs to happen, that would be great.
You bet.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Thank
All
you.
right, questioned out for the moment. All right, council discussion, thoughts? Valerie?
Well, seeing as it's going to the UAPC, I feel comfortable that they will vet it, and they know more than I do about it, and that gives opportunities for not only public input here, but public input there as well. So I say that we stand back and let the process happen. I don't know, at this point, if I have enough to add to be able to add anything to the discussion to UAPC, but I do trust their ability to vet what comes before them. So that's my recommendation, is that we stand back and let the process happen.
Brian?
Thanks. I'm just getting my notes here. So the last time we talked about this up here was in August. We had a really detailed presentation from staff. It was so good that I actually asked for another printed copy on the dais for myself today. But I also reviewed some of that video, and at the last meeting, HAC was here, and they made it clear that their recommendation to us was at least a 60% minimum density, that they did not want to, preclude us from doing higher than 60%, but they said that we should be doing at least a 60% minimum. So I just wanted to make that point first. And then I was listening back to that March meeting again, and they were going over some of the examples. And in our last meeting, we had a lot of slides with example projects in town that have already been completed. And the examples from the HAC meeting, they were meeting close to, the ones that they looked at, they were meeting close to 70% without even having any sort of requirement. And then the ones in our packet from August, one was 93%, one was 78%, 90%, 91%, 96%, and the lowest one presented was 67%. So it's been demonstrated that 60% is a really, really low bar, because people are meeting it now without even being asked to meet it. So I feel like 60% is kind of a diluted response given the magnitude of the situation we're facing. In that last workshop we had, they also had the numbers from the housing needs analysis, and it was really great. They had it broken out, how many potential units we would get if we did 60% and how many potential units we would get if we did 80%. And the housing needs analysis says that we need 4,055 over the next 20 years, 4,055. If we do 60%, we have 3,331, and that's assuming all of the land is available and built on. And it also says calculations assume gross density, net density results in fewer units. So that 3,331 isn't even a realistic number. The 80% number was 4,441. So that is more in line with what the housing needs analysis tells us that we need. So I would be in favor of considering higher than 60%, maybe not across the board for all zones, but maybe if we did something like an 80% in the R4, because R4 is the highest density zone, and that's where we can get the most, I guess, bang for our buck as far as density goes. So if we did like an 80% in R4 and then 60 or 70% in the R3, and then I would also really like to look at the R2 because there's a lot of R2 land available, and so something lower in the R2, something less onerous like 50% in the R2, just so there's some sort of base requirement for the R2, I think would be good. So in summary, I just think that, you know, saying 60% R3, R4 and just saying we're done with it is kind of, you know, not being as effective as we can be. And I think that this is a really important tool that we're looking at to address the housing crisis, and I want us to fully flesh it out. Thank you.
Rick?
I'm in favor of the 60%, and I realize this is a major step forward over what's occurred out there right now, because there is the ability to take the higher density properties and just put single-family dwellings on them. But I feel at this time putting more constraints on the building industry is not appropriate. And the other thing I do have concern, which was raised this morning, would be financing. As you go for the higher densities and so forth, are they going to be able to find the financing for that? And at this time, we don't have that answer. So that would be additional input that might be appropriate in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? Vanessa?
Yeah, I'll second what Councilor De La Grange had said. I do believe that 60% density may have been adequate 10 years ago. But with decades of underbuilding in our community, we really do have to treat the housing crisis like the crisis that it is. I do believe an 80% minimum density would be more appropriate for the situation that we are facing. And this was one of the #1 goals of the Housing Advisory Committee into 2021. So I am very happy that we're seeing it forward. But again, like Councilor De La Grange had said, I would hate for this to be watered down and not really providing the power punch that it could to get our community where it needs to be with housing. And I also would like to see the R2 consideration for minimum densities brought forward as well, because I do understand that's about 1,500 acres of land in our community. So ensuring that those are built out to their highest potential is also very important. Thank you.
Joel?
So Brian, in your analysis, you assume that everybody would go to the minimum density that this council set. It's been my experience that that's not the case. In fact, the examples that you showed at our last meeting where some people didn't even have a minimum density and they went to 90. Economics usually determines that. To have this council make that decision and push the envelope a little bit may make some things uneconomical, they may not. But if it's at a minimum of 60%, you can still build the 80 and 90% and get the number of units that we want. And I think we need to recognize our expertise. And the goal here is to set the minimum, let the economics drive it to make it even higher, hopefully. And I think we'll be in good shape. The one thing I would hate to have happen is set it at 80, and then somebody comes along, like I've known several developers in other towns, it was in Forest Grove, where the requirements were such like that, and they couldn't pencil it out, where they could at 60. So it depends on the market, because you know the market goes like this, and for us to determine that, I think is not our expertise. We need to let the free market determine that, but set that minimum and let them go above it to reach our capacity. So that's what I would favor.
Valerie?
Yeah, I'm just going to add to that that is basically you have to let the market drive it, because that is how our system works. And I know I get the argument that says, oh no, they won't do it, but you can't make them do it. And that's just like anything else. You've got to work with your community development to make it happen. And as Joel pointed out, setting a minimum density does not mean, to me, economically, the more units they can get on there, the more profit they're going to make. So let them determine that. That's their expertise. Encourage it. And I do believe that they will rise to the occasion. But I think if you tell them what they have to do, you're just alienating them. And that's not going to do the community any good.
Vanessa?
I also did review the Housing Advisory Committee meetings where this discussion came from. And I do appreciate councilors recognizing the expertise of the Housing Advisory Committee, but it does appear as though the 60% recommendation was originally extremely arbitrary. And it sounds like the Housing Advisory Committee kind of outlined that at our last workshop on this topic, that it was a baseline for consideration. It wasn't necessarily how this situation should move forward. And also, I would like to remind the council that allowing the free market to make decisions for this community is what's gotten us into this situation. So that's why it is our legislative duty to steer the market in the direction that we need it to go for all of our constituents.
Brian?
So I appreciate some of the points that Joel and Valerie brought up. The great thing is that staff has baked in an exception process for this. So if there is some sort of constraint that makes it too onerous, there is a process for them to work through that issue to make the site buildable. So if we set it at 70 or we set it at 80, there's a process for them to work through to build on that site if they cannot meet that. So that's why I'm not concerned about setting that higher number, is because there's a built-in process for exceptions. As far as the financing piece, I think that there's, we now have a tool to help address that. We just passed the CET. We're gonna have close to $500,000 a year to help with projects, and this very well could be a thing that we decided to put some money towards. So there's tools that we have to incentivize builders to do this as well. There was one other stat I wanted to share, and Brad covered it, the 4,055 units over 20 years, and 13% of that needed to be, or was estimated to be, apartments. And so I just broke that down, and that's 527 apartment units. And over 20 years, that would be 26 apartment units per year, which, you know, when you break it down to a per year, that doesn't sound like very much. It sounds pretty doable. But looking at the past 5 years and even past that, we haven't built any apartments. The past 5 years, there have been 0 permits pulled for apartment buildings. So we're absolutely deficient in that segment of our housing. And so we need to take action to make that housing get built. So that's why I'm pushing more in the R4 for a higher percentage, 80%, 70%, with exceptions, you know, because that's key to this, is having the exceptions because of all the points that have been made. Yeah, thanks.
All right, well, we're at a point here where we've heard 3 people say that they're ready to move on with 60%, and 2 people saying that they want different standards, and 3 people that I haven't heard from, so I'm not really sure what our direction is at this point. 2 people did mention wanting to learn more about financing and whether or not these proposals are feasible. Yeah, Rick?
I think the discussion on what percentage of density and the financial side of it can even be brought out with the planning commission hearing at that time rather than stall things here if we're trying to move forward. Thank you.
All right. I guess we have 3 people who are interested in pushing it forward. Are there other people who are interested in pushing it forward? Rob?
Well, as we've already talked about, I mean, Brian brings up a lot of very valid points. We've already talked, we want to hear from the Planning Commission, and we want to hear really from the banking community. There's a lot of great information here, but there's a little bit more that we would need, I think, to decide which, you know, if we want to push that envelope any further. So, and I think that the points that Brian brought up that are probably really need to be kept in mind is that there are exceptions, and that to push some of the, like the R4 particularly, push that to the limit might actually be more practical. But I would like to hear what the Planning Commission has to say.
So you would support moving this forward to the Planning Commission now?
I would.
Okay. That gets us up to 4 in that direction, and apparently Councillor Fraser is still not on the line. All right. I guess let's move it forward and hear what the Planning Commission has to say. Next up is a discussion on the fireworks, potential fireworks ban.
Okay. Good afternoon, Council. Randy DeLong with Fire Rescue here, and discuss the fireworks within the city limits of Grants Pass. So what I've got is we're going to go over a little bit of the history, what we're currently actually doing, a little bit about Oregon law, and then some options for you to consider. Part of the history of fireworks within the city limits of Grants Pass is actually back in 1984, they were banned. And so from 1984 to 1997, and actually going into 98, the ban was in place. In 1985, they actually amended the ordinance to include the actual owning of fireworks, that you couldn't actually have them in possession within the city. The reason that they gave for that was that due to firework changes, that they became more powerful, and they were increasing in some fire behavior activity. There were 3 fires that they had cited on there, but they didn't give any idea of what those fires actually were. Given the time frame and just kind of knowing the nature of back then, I would assume that they were probably related to structure fires. Urban interface wasn't such a big deal at that moment. Moving in 97, that year they actually changed the ordinance, but it didn't go into effect in 98. So in 97 is actually the year that I started. So I got to actually get a little bit of this as we were going out and about and serving the community. We went out and we enforced the fireworks ban for the community. We were looking for illegal fireworks. Of course, we were responsible for fires. And then just going through and based on either complaints or driving around and seeing them, we would stop and enforce any fireworks that were being used. One area example I saw was Hawthorne, Lawn Ridge area, one of those places we were driving down, and here's the family out using their fireworks. Legally bought fireworks, although because of the ban and ordinance, were not legal in the city of Grants Pass, and so we stopped, advised them of the ordinance, and at that time, again, ownership wasn't allowed, so confiscated the fireworks from them. Going into 98, of course, that changed and into where we are currently. So that ban, or the ordinance is still in place. We're banned for the use of the fireworks most of the time, but we do allow them from 1800 to 11 o'clock on the 4th of July. Our plan for the 4th of July is actually pretty specific. My number one goal is we want to keep our units in district as much as possible. We want them response ready. We want them as centrally located so that we can minimize that response. We can get on things quickly and keep everything small. We do take over fireworks complaints from the city police around 6 p.m. that night. We do that because they become so overwhelmed with other calls. This is something that we can go out and about while we're also patrolling our areas and kind of help them out. The one downside to that is we're not able to cite an ORS. So ORS for illegal fireworks is something that a police officer has to cite for. So if we actually have a need to do that, we have to request the officer to respond with us. We do standby detail at the fireworks display for the community. So we always have at least one unit that's down there ready to go in the event that something happens. We patrol our urban interface areas, and that's probably one of the most important things that we do. We've got both of our brush units back on that night, staffed up at extra, and the whole goal is to stay out and patrol in those urban interface units, make sure that we don't have anybody illegally using fireworks, and if by chance we do get a fire up in there, that we can again get on them quickly and keep them small. Positive community engagement is the other one that I always really focus heavily on. When we are out and about, and especially when we do see those families are out there that are following and abiding by the rules, I always encourage our folks to go out, meet with them, talk with them, and kind of let them know that we appreciate that they're actually out there and abiding by the stuff that's the rules and stuff given and not using all the illegal fireworks. Firework calls on the 4th of July. So for 2021 and 2020, I've got the information here listed. We had 89 firework complaints this last year, 2 grass fires that we responded on, one of which was outside the city limits. The other was fairly earlier in the day, believed to be that it was firework related. In 2020, we responded on 74 firework complaints, 5 grass fires. 4 of those were outside of the city limits, and then we had 1 dumpster fire. I went back and actually also looked at 2018 because I was a little surprised that these numbers were as high as they were. And in 2018, which was one of the busiest years that I've seen for us as far as responding to fires related to fireworks, we only had between 30 and 40 firework complaints that we went on that night. So we've definitely increased in the last 2 years significantly in the amount of fireworks complaints we're getting. Part of that could definitely be more people actually using illegal fireworks, and that's mostly what we're responding on, the aerials and mortars that people are illegally using in the city. It could also be related to the fires that we've recently had, both Paradise and Alameda, Open Chain. Those have definitely, people are a little bit more cautious and they're a little bit more sensitive to those things. So state of Oregon laws, fireworks may be sold in Oregon between June 23rd and July 6th. And this one's often confused because a lot of people think that in the state of Oregon, that's the only time that you're actually allowed to light fireworks. In the state of Oregon, there's actually nothing that prohibits you from lighting fireworks during any time unless it's by a special ordinance or by a fire restriction. So you can buy, as long as your fireworks are bought legally within the state, and that's one of the things, you can't buy fireworks outside the state, even if they meet the legal guidelines. Technically, they have to be legally bought within the state of Oregon. You can light those at any time. Of course, in the city, we do have the ordinance there, so we're only allowing them on the evening of 4th of July. So outside of those limitations, our ordinance applies. Options that we're going to discuss here a little bit. One is refer this to the Fire Adaptive Committee. The second one, restrict fireworks use based on fire season metrics. Do not allow firework use within the city limits, and make no change. So the first one, refer to the Fire Adaptive Committee. This committee, as you know, is being formed to review and provide recommendations for our wildland fire threat. And if this is the main reason that we're looking at as far as to make this change, I think that the committee would be best suited to help provide the guidance in this general direction. Now there's other options on why people actually would like to look at banning fireworks as well. You don't just have the fire threat, but you also have got the issue with animals, and then we've got PTSD for our veterans that have come back. So all 3 of those are ideas, but if the main goal is wildland fire threat, I think definitely this adaptive committee would be the one to kind of look at that. Metrics-based decision. So a metrics-based decision would basically be, we would create some metrics that we would look at early on. We could do that through Oregon Department of Forestry. We'd look at fire season, and then therefore we could actually bring that idea to you and say, based on here's our current metrics, we're recommending that we ban the fireworks for this season because we're feeling that fire season is actually a greater threat than maybe other years. As we know, fire seasons can change from year to year. Just because we're dry one year doesn't mean the next year we won't have rain. Historically, over my time here within the city, I can say that when I first started, we were very wet as far as on this side, and we didn't see a lot of large fire, and we've definitely seen increased amount of drying and fire growth up to through the last years, where they're probably some of the driest summers that I've seen. What I've got on there is that little picture is what we use during wildland fire season. And that's a little chart, and it mimics and it looks at basically the time of year and then what's called the energy release component. And that's what actually I would recommend looking at as one of the other metrics to be used. That lets us know if it's likely to have a fire that's going to take off and become a large fire event for us. And each year they actually produce new ones of these. ODF updates them every week based on the current fire season and where they're at. So it's kind of an actual time as we're going risk for wildfire events, and lets us really get a good idea on what our threat potential is going into that next week. Call to action for you. Your discretion, looking at which one of these options that you would like or any other option that you come up with. Recommendation would be refer to the Fire Adaptive Committee. That committee is actually, I've got the information to the city manager, so that should be coming up on the agenda here soon for you guys to actually go over and look at the formation and the makeup of that committee. Then the alternatives: restrict firework use based on fire season metrics, do not allow fireworks use within the city limits, and or make no change. Any questions?
Thanks, Randy. Council questions, Valerie?
Yes, thank you very much. Great presentation. You mentioned the Fire Adaptive Committee. Will the Fire Adaptive Committee be looking at the metrics? I would assume that that would be one of the things that they would do. Is that correct? And they would probably be fire people, or a majority of fire people who would understand those sort of metrics?
So the
Can I assume that?
Yeah, the Fire Adaptive Committee should be looking at our wildland-urban interface threat as a whole and coming up with a solution of what they think is going to be best for us moving forward. So they could also look at the same thing and recommend looking at seasonal metrics as an idea. They could look at the past history of the last few years that we've had and our increased fires. They could look at the areas, currently we are restricted in all our wildland urban interface areas anyway with the current ordinance.
So my question is, I'm assuming that that is a committee that you said Aaron hasn't put it on our agenda yet, but would come forth. Is that a committee that's an ongoing committee, or is it a task force? And I'm just kind of curious.
So the way it was presented, and for you guys to look at, but would be an ongoing steering committee. I would see that it would be probably several years, because some of these things might take quite a long time to actually get going. And you asked about the membership. Yes, members of ODF, of course, city council, city staff, fire agency members, and looking at the community as a whole as we're moving forward on changing our risk for wildfire threats.
Thank you.
Rob, then Joel.
So when you refer to restrict firework use based on fire season metrics, so what would be the minimum length of time that decision will be made before the 4th of July?
So what we would look at doing is probably 1 to 2 weeks out, and I would say 2 weeks is probably going to be the safest, because my thought is that we'd actually look at these metrics and say that our energy release component's up this year, we're already in extreme fire risk, and or the worst case scenario is we've got a red flag warning coming in. We have a red flag warning, low humidities, east winds. Then we would make the recommendation to City Council that based on the metrics this year, we're recommending that fireworks actually get banned. Then there where you guys could actually get together and make the official decision if that's the direction that you would like to go.
So would you happen to know, I wouldn't expect you to, but maybe, would you happen to know the fireworks purveyors, the people that sell them, when are they stocking up? Are they stocking up months ahead, years ahead, a week before? In other words, when the metric, I guess it would be fair to them to have the metrics announced long before they bought their their stock. So would you happen to know what kind of lead time they have when they purchase?
I don't know what the lead time is. I believe most of it gets shipped in from the vendor relatively close to the dates that they actually open up. There are some other options though there as well. You could open up and say if we had a ban on 4th of July and we're not able to do it this year, at the discretion of the council, you could look at New Year's Eve and say we're going to go ahead and allow this year for it to be from 6 p.m. to 11 p.m. on New Year's Eve. That for it not affecting the sales. So again, you can hold it. You're allowed to have the fireworks and you're allowed to use them anytime other than local ordinances.
Joel?
Good presentation. With those metrics, I know ODF uses those to when to shut down, like smoking outside a vehicle and those kind of things. What are the metrics that they use for shutting off fireworks on public land?
So the metrics, when they go into extreme fire season, they're definitely going to be shut down.
Okay. So no fireworks on public land when the
No
metrics are
fireworks
in the
on-
extreme fire
on
danger?
public, on extreme, and I'd have to go back and double check if it's from moderate on up through extreme or where that actual cutoff is. However, in private lands, private ownership, as long as the person it's their responsibility to ensure
Sure.
that they're doing those safely, so it doesn't affect over there.
Then part of that, are you familiar with the predictive services so they can predict 1 month out or 2 months out what the
Yes.
ERCs are going to be?
Yep.
And then you just say what the level is. And
Yep.
the other thing is, are you familiar with, you can also have a short-term, I remember, geez, a couple of years ago, I think it was when the fire was down in Agnes, where we had the red flag warnings and we had the east winds and they were like 50 miles an hour. Regardless of the ERCs, when you got that event coming up, and you're not going to get 2 months notice on that. You're going to get maybe 2 days, but that could be a real life changer if you get a fire started there. That was horrific.
Yes.
And it was very similar to what happened down in Talent. So I would say that the Fire Adaptive Committee needs to look at both the long-term decision, 2 months ahead of time using predictive services, and then monitor it. And maybe it's not the Adaptive Committee that monitors that, maybe it's you folks. And so when you get a red flag warning, or a possible red flag warning a week ahead of time that people know, because regardless of people's selling of fireworks and that kind of thing, we don't want to burn people's houses down. Okay, thank you.
The greatest risk that I see for us is actually going to be a red flag warning. You have something that came in like last September, low humidities, those stronger winds are definitely going to create more of a risk. And you're right. Your notice on that, maybe 3 to 4 days if we're lucky. Sometimes they get a little bit of an idea a week or two ahead that we can start preparing for stuff. But most of the time when we're going into fire season in July, by the time we start hitting our evening hours, our humidity recoveries are going back up. And that's what's allowing us to keep all of the fires relatively small.
And you can tell the people that decision and being short-term is our responsibility, and so they can blame us. Okay.
Your big shoulders.
Brian? Then Kurt?
Yeah, thank you for the presentation. Early on in the presentation, you said that, the ordinance was created in '97 and it's still prohibited in hillside areas and in city parks. And I was wondering if hillside areas is synonymous with urban wildland interface, or if, I guess I'm asking, is there a ban in the urban wildland interface zones, or hillside areas something different?
Yeah, so the hillside areas are, of course, going to be to our northeast, northwest, and down in the south in the Havilon, Cloverlawn areas. All of those areas with the urban interface and the hills together, that's one of our other great risks that we have as far as slope and fuel load. So that's all banned in there. So you can kind of think of those as synonymous.
Okay, so it'd be safe to say that it's currently banned in the urban wildland interface areas?
Yes, and that's one of the things that we focus on in our patrol is in those wildland urban interface areas. So we want to make sure that we don't have people out there using, whether they're legally bought ones or illegal bought ones, that's our greater risk areas.
Okay, that's great. I don't know if you have any knowledge of this or not, but with regards to the city parks portion, do you happen to know the rationale behind why they might be prohibited in the city parks?
I don't.
Okay,
So,
all right.
on that one, before my time on that, I know that during my years here, we haven't really seen much of an issue in the city parks. It is relatively, most of the people do stay out of the parks when they're doing that.
Okay. And then lastly, regarding the Firewise Committee, I don't know if you have this knowledge or not, but do you have any idea of the time frame as far as like when that might be coming to us and when it's going to be formed? I'm just curious. I'm trying to get to the point of will they be able to address this before this year's July 4th or not?
So I would hope that they'd be able to address it before this 4th of July. I would actually, hopefully the committee will be coming for you in the next month or so. And therefore we can get them actually organized and going, because there's probably some things that we can actually work on getting going into this fire season. Some shorter term ideas, and then also start with our long range planning for the future.
Okay, great, thank you.
Sorry.
Kurt, then Rick, then Rob.
I don't know the answer to Rob's question, but I would be willing to bet most of my rent that it's at least 6 months. So I don't think we could reasonably waver on this. I'm not a big proponent of doing away with the fireworks. I have a lot of good memories of doing fireworks as a kid, and I had a responsible parent, and I was a responsible parent when I was doing it. But I think that we can't leave it to the last minute and say, yeah, we're going to do it, or no, we're not. And if we're allowing it to be sold, then people are going to use them. If we can't get them to wear masks, we can't get them to stop shooting fireworks. So even though I'm really not for it, I mean, the right thing to do is either get rid of it altogether or allow it. So my thoughts are, if the right thing is to stop doing fireworks, then let's stop doing them. Thanks.
Rick?
Randy, when you look back at this last season of fireworks, do you feel there was adequate promotion of the rules concerning fireworks? And do you see where the Fire Adaptive Committee would make recommendations as what should be done for the future?
Most of the illegal fireworks that are out there, I feel those people adequately know that they are buying fireworks that are not legal within the state of Oregon. And out of all the types of things that we're looking at risk-wise, you're talking about aerial fireworks that are not only be able to go farther, have more mishap, go up on roofs and cause other issues. And I think they're very well aware that they know what is going on and what they're doing. They are just choosing not to listen to it. And looking at the numbers again, going from what 2018 was, and I'm not sure if it's because COVID and more people have been home and not out doing stuff, but seeing almost a double in the complaints between up to 2020 and 21 definitely has me concerned, because again, that's mainly focused on illegal fireworks, ones that are already, you have to go outside the state to purchase, because you can't purchase them in Oregon.
Rob?
So it's my understanding that the city of Bend passed a fireworks ban last year, or maybe it's this calendar year. Do you know what the driver was there, what their main concern was, or any of the discussion was?
I don't. I can reach out to them and get more information. I'd be happy to do so on that, and even see how it worked for them.
Yeah, to me, that would be actually a really key piece.
Okay.
To know exactly what the driver was there. And, you know, one of the things I don't want to saddle law enforcement with is an unworkable or untenable enforcement situation, because then the law just becomes a joke. But I guess we all know that too, that if the law changes, then there's a lot of law-abiding citizens that'll just comply for that reason. They're law-abiding. But it just concerns me that I'd like to know in Bend what kind of enforcement issues their new law, if it was enforced last year, I'm not sure, what kind of enforcement issues their new law may have created, and what the driver was for those, for pushing that.
Vanessa, then Joel?
I want to take a moment to answer your question, Councillor Pell. The city of Bend, actually, their major consideration was the 2017 wildfire in the Columbia River Gorge that was started by a teenager who threw lit fireworks into the canyon. And I do believe also the significant community feedback that they did receive also was a huge consideration. Also, hi Randy, thank you for coming today in your presentation. You mentioned an increased amount of drying annually in our community. Can you talk a little bit about how fires appear to be increasingly aggressive and more difficult to fight?
Yeah, so I can give you a little bit more of my background. I actually started in the Forest Service. I spent 3 years on a hotshot crew before I actually came over here and started with the city of Grants Pass. So I have a little bit of wildland knowledge. During that time frame, it was over in the Klamath area, well known to be a lot drier than this site at that point in time. We had 100-acre fires over there. 2,000-acre fires were not uncommon on any given time. And when I came and moved over to Grants Pass in '97, started here, actually spent up until the year of the Biscuit Fire with very minimal fires. Occasionally we'd get one that might take off over in like the Sam's Valley area and went a little bit, but we didn't have that large growth fire. We didn't have these big fires that we've seen these last few years. Progressively from then till now, definitely seen an increase in not only the amount of fires that we seem to be having, but the size of fires and how quickly they are growing. Up to 2018, as far as fireworks go, was one of the busiest years, and it wasn't just fireworks that year. If you remember, the lightning storm came through. We had Taylor Creek and all the other fires that started down here. Before that started, we had a just huge amount of fires that were being started, human-caused fires, almost every day. And part of the biggest issue was you have people that were doing things like weed burning or illegal operations or open burn piles, things that they shouldn't be doing, but also mixed with fuels that were much drier than normal, which is why that lightning bust happened and why we had so many fires. And so just from then till now, just definitely seeing a lot more the fuels becoming drier and drier each season and year. Obviously, this is something that's it appears to be more in the long term. And even if you go back and think about historical fires as far as communities threatened, looking at Southern California. You know, Southern California, we know the Santa Ana winds, and we've watched for how many years as that has happened. And you kind of slowly watched California's, those fire events move up to, they were down into Redding, you had the Carr Fire, and then you had Paradise, and you've had a few other fires. And to most recently last year, where we had Alameda, Obenchain, out there in IV, the fire out there. So just definitely watching almost a trend of that drying working up that west coast with increased fires and increased fire behavior and large fire growth.
Thank you.
Joel?
Well, first off, I want to thank you for your service. You did a good job. And saved my rear end several times. So Bend has different ERCs and we do their higher. So they're going to cross that threshold more often than we are, just like we're going to cross the threshold more often than Seattle, than the Olympic Peninsula. And so then the question is, what is the threshold and how often do you cross it? Do you cross it every year? Well, then just go ahead like Councillor Collins says, and just ban it every year. If you're only going to cross that threshold 50% of the time, and people can celebrate 4th of July in a responsible manner with those kind of restrictions, and I think that committee hopefully can come back to us with that, and with the metrics. And regardless of that, the red flag warning, you can't be deterred by somebody bought their fireworks and all of a sudden tomorrow there's this extreme event coming, like the Columbus Day storm or a big thunderstorm or whatever. You got to bite the bullet and say, hey, I'm sorry, but we can't use fireworks tomorrow because the weather's too extreme. You just have to bite the bullet.
Any other questions? All right, thanks, Randy.
You're welcome.
All right, council discussion. Brian?
I just wanted to follow up on Joel's point. I always want to capitalize on opportunities when we agree, Joel. So, you know, it only makes sense to not allow fireworks during a red flag warning. That's just asking for trouble. That's just being irresponsible. So at a bare minimum, I would think that it would be good for us to institute a ban during a red flag warning. Seems like the sensible thing to do to me. And then aside from that, I would probably prefer to refer the rest to the committee. Thanks.
Rob?
Well, while I agree with Joel as far as prohibiting fireworks during a red flag warning, realistically, and that's the thing, we're actually dealing with humans, realistically, to allow people to stock up on their fireworks and get excited about the 4th of July, and then, 48 hours before to say, gee, sorry, you're just going to have to be good citizens and keep those, locked in your cupboard away from your kids or whatever. I just don't know how realistic that is. So that's my concern there. This is, if this were decades ago, I think that maybe more people might be more likely to follow that type of advice. But it's so hard for me to imagine people having, stocked up on their fireworks and then at the last minute having that concept pulled from them. I don't know if that's actually going to get us the result we want.
Oh my, everybody's hand is up. I'm going to say Vanessa and then back to Joel, and then we'll go to the other side. I had a quick question though. I just wanted to clarify with either Randy or the chief. Fireworks sales are always illegal within the city limits. Is that true? Or can you buy fireworks in the city limits?
No, I didn't think you can. Randy, can you confirm that?
Yeah, in the city limits, they are illegal. You can only buy them in stands that are outside the city limits.
Okay. So we'd only be banning using them in the city. We have no control over the sales that happen outside the city. Vanessa, then Joel.
Just because on the recording, sometimes it's hard to hear if someone's not speaking to a microphone, I would just like to reiterate, go ahead, Randy, yes, please.
Yes, the sales of fireworks are banned within the city limits at all times. You can only buy fireworks outside the city limits that stands within the county.
Thank you. So I do believe that the city of Grants Pass is kind of behind the ball on this ban. There are 21 Oregon cities and counties that actively have firework bans, mostly beginning in 2021. We do know that the Oregon State Fire Marshal's Office reported between 2014 and 2019, there were over 1,100 firework-related fires in Oregon, resulting in more than $4.9 million in property loss. And actually, one did result in death and multiple injuries. Even right now, in late fall, the city of Grants Pass is categorically in severe drought. And we do know annually that our droughts continue to get worse and our fuels are drier. Fires are appearing to be more aggressive year to year. And I do believe that allowing fireworks in the city limits during these increased annual droughts creates unnecessary fire risk. It causes undue stress to the community. As the stats reported in 2020 and 2021, the firework complaints increased, more than doubled. And I did also notice that in my position here that the outreach from the community was significant during the 4th of July from people with grave concerns over firework and firework danger. So I would be in support of moving forward with a firework ban in the city.
Joel.
So with regards to Rob's statement, yes, there would be an impact. We have that all the time. We've even banned people from going onto public lands. We ban campfires. If they have a trip and they're going on a campfire trip or they're going down the river, tomorrow you may not be able to have a fire on the river. You let them know that ahead of time and they can make their own choice. And the same thing with well, the real extreme things where you close the forest down, and you don't even allow them to travel on the road. So those things are done all the time. You need to do a public information plan that people know the possibilities ahead of time and what can happen and what can't happen. Myself, I got a lot of black snakes with my grandkids out in my back patio. Well, one year I went, we're in a special stage of life and it's fun. So I bought a $200 pack of fireworks. They're the innocuous ones that are kind of boring. And I went out on our street, and all the kids came for 2 blocks around. And we lit these little black snakes that went like this. And we had those things you throw down and they pop. And it was pretty innocuous. And everybody had a good time. And the biggest burden was cleaning up the next morning. So I hope we don't overreact. I don't want to underreact because what Vanessa said is true. People's houses are at risk, and we don't want to take any chances on that. But I think there's a middle ground there that we can move forward in a way that make sure during the red flag warnings we shut them down. People know that that's a possibility ahead of time. Refer it over to the fire committee. Look at metrics and look at long-term forecasts. Right now, we're supposed to be in a wetting trend this winter. I haven't seen it yet, but it's a 50-50 chance. I look at it about every other week just to see what's going on. And I look at those metrics that our public servant graciously shared with us, just for when we're burning out of our property, so that I make sound decisions and I don't put my neighbor's house at risk. So I think there's some middle ground there that we can celebrate the independence of our country and honor our traditions and not put our people's houses at risk. So thank you.
Valerie?
I think the reality of this is, yes, the complaints are going up, and I get it. I would have complained this last year because it was crazy. But those ones that were crazy were illegal now. So it kind of comes down to enforcement. You can pass any law you want. You can tell people what to do, but unless you have the enforcement to back it up, you're wasting your time. And I don't know about me, but I would say that I don't think we have the capacity, am I correct, Warren, to cite everybody and run around all over town to try to...
Yeah, you're correct. There's just not enough time in the day. Our men and women are call to call, and just like Randy mentioned, he might want a police officer to come there to cite somebody, but good luck. A police officer probably won't come because there'll be other calls to deal with. We were pretty busy last 4th of July.
And I will say, if you look at the number of fires last year, I think that there are a lot of people who understand it. Now, I do truly believe that we need to move forward with the recommendation of the staff. I truly do believe that, but I don't think that you can just make a law to make a law and think that people are going to say, okay, it's illegal this year, so I'm not going to, I hate to say this, but my father, he worked in Montana, and I tell you, he loves the 4th of July, and he brought some things home that scared me to death to this day. But you would not have stopped my father. I don't care what law you had, and I will say the same thing goes. Those people who love their fireworks, and I think it's no different than the mask or whatever. They're going to look at it as a take away their freedom, and I think you have to think about that when you go forward to make the rule. Do there need to be some things that need to be taken into consideration, and do we all know and understand the fire danger that is out there? And that's why you're getting the complaints. It's fear. Right now, we're all in fear of fires. But if you look at it, the last 2 years, they've been all outside of the city. So, one was in the city last year. Think about that. I'm amazed that only one was in the city this last year. So, and I, like Joel, I watch all my neighbors come out every 4th of July, and that's children, and what a joy it is for them. Would I like to see more city-sponsored or events that they could watch fireworks? that to me is the answer, but do we have the money to do that? We didn't last year. So I'm saying that my belief is that we need to go with this committee, and we need to say this committee needs to get activated as quickly as possible and give us some recommendations and some things long before, at the beginning of summer. So we know going into it that we are watching it, and we are going to follow the recommendations from the fire people who know who are the experts.
Brian?
Yeah, thanks. I was going to touch on one of Rob's points, but Valerie just kind of said it again, so I guess I'll respond to both of them. And it was an argument kind of along the lines of what's the point of even, trying to put something in place if people aren't going to follow it. And that is not the logic you want to be using in this situation. There are a lot of law-abiding members of this community, and for you to say that is just to assume that everyone is lawless and going to do what they want, regardless of what we advise. And that's just not the case. I mean, even if we put something into effect and only 50% follow it, that's still a 50% reduction. So to say that nobody's going to listen when we're trying to protect the community is just off base. So I love fireworks too. I mean, I'm not trying to ruin anyone's holiday, but I'm also not trying to have the town burn down. So let's send it to the committee. Let's see what the experts have to say. But the restricting and having a ban during red flag warnings, abso-freaking-lutely. And then I would even be considering a ban during extreme fire risk. I think that would be prudent as well. So, and I would hope that the committee could at least tackle this topic in enough time for us to get this information out in a public information campaign, sooner than a couple months before 4th of July. Thanks.
Any other comments? We have 4 people have expressed an interest in pursuing a ban during the red flag warning. So is that something you want to bring to a business meeting? Seeing a yes from Joel. Joel's nodding enough for half the room over there, but I'm not sure it works that way, Joel.
And there's numerous other things that go along with that too.
All right.
That might be even more important.
All right, well, let's move forward with that at a workshop at a business meeting, and you guys can continue to deliberate and see where we land on that subject. Sounds like that committee is already rolling forward. Otherwise,
I see you probably have a question about the committee. I know that we still have to get that on the agenda to be approved by you all through resolution, but that is soon to come. So hopefully into the new year very early.
sounds good. Yeah, we've had lots of fire urban interface questions this year. So I think even though we hadn't heard of the committee before today, that I'm aware of anyway, I think the council will be supportive of moving forward with that. How about agenda review? So, next week we have a workshop where we're going to have a presentation from the county regarding an emergency operations plan. We're going to have a presentation regarding the water treatment plant technology selection as well. So, and then we have an executive session regarding pending litigation. So that's going to be a big one. Folks, block out a good chunk of time for yourself next Monday. Then next Wednesday, there's a business meeting with a overview of the CDBG, which is Community Development Block Grant program year for 2020. And I do not know what CAPER stands for, so who's,
Sorry about that, Mayor. We
all
were
right.
trying to get That is the annual report for the last year's CDBG program. So that's an annual summary of what happened the prior year.
Okay.
So it's, yeah.
Thank you. And then we have a public hearing on a ordinance to consider a property line vacation. We have a council action item on awarding the affordable housing RFP on Southwest Ramsey. A council action item on a resolution that would form the Caveman Plaza Task Force. It's kind of funny that we still call it Caveman Plaza, huh? Maybe, I think it's actually called the Town Center Plaza these days. But. And then a council action item on a resolution for that HB 2006 application. On the consent calendar, we have a resolution that would update the comprehensive fee schedule, a resolution to renew the ESRI software. Who uses that? What's the ESRI?
Esri is our GIS software. Everybody in the city and the public has access to that.
Okay, thank you. And then a resolution that would approve the city manager's evaluation. Questions about any of that? Val?
I do. First of all, I just want to know, because this was on there before, the resolution on the HB 2006 application. Is that something where we are building an application, or is this the, I'm not clear what that is.
Yeah, I had sent a memo about a week and a half ago. It should come through Aaron, I believe, under his name, that gave kind of the content of what that application would be. We have drafted it, but this relates to emergency shelters and the allowance to construct those up through July 1st of 2022 without a land use public hearing. So it's an administrative review of those emergency shelters, and it just shows you specifically what the application form looks like and what the required content of that application is. So it's, I think the point of that is to sort of have the council formally recognize that application before we put it on our website and make it publicly available.
Okay, thank you for that. That was one question I had. I also had another question on the resolution approving city manager evaluation. I know that we talked about the fact that we were going to have that happen in open meeting, but if it's CC, it's not really open meeting. So I don't know whether that needs to be starred, whether that needs to be council action. I'm unsure of what.
It is an open meeting when it's on the consent calendar because it's not during executive session, but I don't know if there's anything you still want to discuss. Rob?
Yeah, I have a question about it, and I was going to bring up the possibility of, it's a really simple question, I think. So I'm not 100% sure of the answer. When we as a council approved the additional steps for basically long-term employees to additional steps, whatever, steps 8, 9, and 10 or something like that on their pay scale. Does that affect the city manager? And with regards to the whatever his final grade was during the evaluation, does that automatically trigger a raise over and above the cost of living that I assume he's getting? But I guess the cost of living should be discussed also. So I guess I'm asking that be removed to be able to just publicly discuss those two brief questions.
Well, just to answer one of your questions, if the grade is 2.5 or higher, then yes, that does automatically result in a step increase, and the manager is included in the manager's non-union representative group, of management, so.
But he was topped out. He was topped out like 2 years ago. He was at his final step. So my question is, yeah, he was. So my question is, when we added those additional steps, did that affect his situation? Because he wasn't eligible for a step raise last year because he had already hit the top step, I think, the prior year. And Valerie's shaking her head yes. So, that's my question is.
I can answer that question for you. I think I fall into the same boat. So the 3% cost of living increase goes into effect July 1st. The 10-step model is already in effect. So then every year, whenever his annual comes around, he will go from step 8, 9, and then 10. So for me, mine is in February, so I jump up to a step 8 in February.
Yeah, that was in some of the materials. I remember seeing that he was at a step 7 and would move to a step 8.
So then I would like that removed from the consent calendar, just so that it can be clear that the raised discussion is made publicly.
Okay, so we'll just move that to a council action item. Valerie?
I would also consider, and I don't even know this needs to be I would just like to have it starred, the resolution updating comprehensive fee schedules, just because I do think it's important that that be described so people know moving forward that the rate that the fee schedule will be increasing. Anyway, so I would like to have that at least be starred so that we could take a look at what is coming down the pike, because I think a lot of times people just want to know.
So you just want a short presentation on what that is?
Yes, I would be happy with a short presentation.
Okay, Rob, are you also okay with just having the city manager as a starred evaluation item, or a starred item?
A short presentation, but I definitely would like a separate vote on that rather than consent calendar.
Okay, you want a separate vote? Okay. That puts it as a council action item. All right. Anything further for those 2 meetings next week? All right, and that actually puts us through the end of the year, because we did go ahead and cancel the 2 workshops at the end of December to buy people a little time to celebrate the holidays with their families. And then July 3rd would be our first workshop of the year, where we are slated to discuss pool funding options, receive the G Street survey results, also discuss a water system risk and resilience study, and then those interviews with candidates are moved. And then January 5th, Wednesday that week, we'll have an election of the new council president, a public hearing on a property line vacation, and a resolution regarding Tyler software management. So, anything next year? Yeah, Joel.
Well, and Vanessa has the details on it because she's been working with the committee. We talked about last year in the middle of fire season, escape routes and escape route planning and fire evacuation plans that, and Vanessa has a special talent for that because of her position and what she does in terms of dispatch. That dispatch knows what's going on. And at that point in time, we said in the wintertime, we were going to look at that in a little more detail when people had more time and it wasn't in the middle of fire season. And so I would defer to Vanessa because I know the committee's been talking about it. And do we need to put that on the agenda or not?
Yeah.
I think Jason may even be equipped to answer this as well.
I can speak, Warren can as well. We've been meeting as a group along with Emily from Emergency Services, and we're working on geographical planning for evacuation routes. So that process is well underway, and we'll probably get that in front of you when it's completed for your consideration.
Vanessa?
And also to add on that, Emergency Management did request $55,000 out of the county's American Rescue Plan funds for emergency management planning and zone mapping.
Just a question.
Yep.
I mean, Emily will be here next Monday, so could she give us an update at that point? Because next Monday, we have the emergency operations plan from Emily, so that might be a good point. And hopefully she can give us an update of what that involves and what's coming down the pike.
Yeah, there is some work being done in the background on that. I don't think we're at the point of having a workshop specifically about that.
Yeah, we just don't want to wait till summer to ask the question
Yes.
and have a presentation right in the middle of fighting fire. I mean, that wouldn't be appropriate.
Sure. Valerie?
And I'm just going to ask, Jason as well, because I've been harassing you about the water system risk and resiliency study. Is that what is coming forward that I've been asking for?
It is, and one of
Okay.
the items that we will discuss is your question about shutting off water in an emergency. And that was one of the items that did make the list, but did get cut. I'll just give you the spoiler alert now, because for a cost-benefit analysis, it wasn't that high. But we'll go through the full risk and resilience plan, which was required by EPA as part of the America Water Infrastructure Act a couple years ago. We have completed that plan, completed the update to the Water System Emergency Operations Plan, and we'll just give you a rundown of both of those at that time.
Okay. I know that question came about as a result of the Alameda fire, because one of the things that they said is that they had no water pressure over there. And the reason they had no water pressure is because of the units, the larger units, who, once those fire sprinklers go off, do not turn off. So therefore, all of the water pours through those systems. And that was part of the problem with trying to having the fire pressure to put out the other fire. So that's where that concern came from, is directly from the result of what happened in Alameda. So I just was wondering where that would fall.
Yeah, and it was actually more widespread. It actually cascaded down to every individual house. So when you go through, say, a mobile home park and they burn down an entire mobile home park, and every plastic service line in that 200 or 300 unit mobile home park burns, suddenly you have 200 or 300 1-inch lines that are spraying water out, and that was the larger cause. The individual fire sprinklers weren't nearly as devastating as all as the individual service lines. So that is one of the things that we did look at, and we'll talk about the options that we did look at.
Okay, thank you. And then I have one more question, and that is because within the last 2 weeks, I have had questions about annexation. I received a text today about, I do know RCC is looking into annexing into the city. I also have been in touch with an individual who has gone out to her neighborhood, and she wants to annex in, and so she has followed the steps for an independent constituent to start the annexation process. And so I would like to have more conversation as to annexation, and I think I've talked with you as well, Bradley, that is something that we have not done in a long time. I see Medford City Council does it all the time, and so I just kind of want to understand it a little better. I think a workshop would be a good thing.
I know for sure we did have a workshop after I talked to that particular person in the Redwood area, so.
But nothing came of it, so we talked about it, but I do think.
Because individuals are able to annex themselves if they so choose, so.
And we do have that coming forward. We have a person who is going to bring that forward, but I would like to just have an idea of how many neighborhoods could do that, and I've never seen a map. And so I think more than anything, I would just like to, and maybe you did show me the map. I do remember seeing a map, but I would like to have that sent, if nothing more, one more time, so I can see who it affects.
And would that be acceptable through a memo?
At this point, yes, but I do know that Judy will bring to the council
Yep.
in a meeting, and so it will, at some point, that will be coming forward to us in the next, I would say, month or two anyway.
Brian, did you have something?
Oh, yeah. It's a different topic, though. I know that I think it was last week, there was the roundtable with all the parties on the urban campground, and I listened in, and even I learned some things, so I thought it was pretty informative, and I think that everyone there probably took some things away from that, and so that's going to need to be on our agenda at some point in the future. I don't see that it's on there now, so I just wanted to put a placeholder on that so that it stays on the agenda. Thanks.
Okay. Anything else? All right. And, okay, just for January, make sure you note strategic planning, the week of January 20th through 22nd. Make sure to block out some time. It's only a month away now. All right, how about
I move that we adjourn into executive session.
thank you. I couldn't think of the words. Valerie seconded. All in favor of adjourning into executive session?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, the council will now meet in executive session for the purpose of discussing those subjects